How's it going? My name is Ed. Today we're going to be going over how to remove the upper oil pan on a Nissan Sentra or Altima that has a qr25 engine. So like on a SpecV, for example, or SCR or Altima 4-cylinder. One of these. So removing the upper oil pan is kind of a pain, so hopefully you get a chance to learn something from this if you need to do this job. So why would you need to remove the upper oil pan? Well, if you're going turbo, you want to put a turbo oil drain in there or weld on a bung or even do a no weld bung. That is one reason. Another reason is if you're having to rebuild the engine, you need to be able to get to your crank and stuff like that. And this is one of the pieces that you need to remove. What you need to know is your block sits up here. You have your lower oil pan that sits here. So when you get a new pan, I do highly recommend getting new O-rings for the oil passages here. So it's 2 oil passages. And I will put a picture of the model number. There's also a pickup tube for the oil that has an O-ring on there. You want to replace that while you're doing it. And then also your dipstick tube. You might as well replace the O-ring on that one too while you're in there and doing everything. And O-rings aren't that expensive. They're a couple dollars a piece. You're also going to want to use some good RTV. I prefer the 3-bond Nissan branded RTV. Works really good. So obviously the first step is you need to jack up the car, which I already did. Next step is we need to drain the oil on it. My particular oil drain plug uses a 14 millimeter, so I just got to find a 14 millimeter and let's drain the oil. Okay, so this is the upper oil pan here. This is the lower right here. Let's drain it. Drain plug's back here. 14 millimeter. Okay, I broke it loose. Well, that's good to know I still have some oil in there. Okay, the next step is we need to remove this cross member here. Now that's still draining. So you got 2 bolts here, 2 bolts back there. But the engine mounts are mounted to this cross member piece. So you need to disconnect those. So you got 2 bolts there that you can disconnect. And then over here, the easiest way to get that one off is getting that bolt right there. And it's on the other side. Just unbolt that and that will disconnect the front. And then after that, this whole member can be dropped. But don't forget your engine mount is actually mounted to the upper pan, which is right there. So that needs to come off too. Once all that's disconnected, that back arm will be able to swing out and away. And so you can get the pan out. So next step is taking the belt off. The reason why you gotta take the belt off is this AC compressor needs to get unbolted. So up there is a 14 millimeter bolt tensioner. Just swing it towards the back. And yeah, you're gonna need to get some leverage on that. You're not gonna be able to really do it by hand very easily. I use an offset one because this is a lot easier. A bell tool with a short socket would work, but the cross foot doesn't seem to work too well. We just gotta unbolt the 2 lower bolts on the AC compressor that goes into the lower oil pan. You do not need to unbolt the top ones. Highly recommend using a ratchet or an impact or something besides what I'm doing. Okay, this is a little easier. Alright, both bolts are fully out. I just gotta send it in there now, just so I know what they go to. But yeah, this is done. You shouldn't have to do anything more with this. And you'll be able to get the oil pan off with this still bolted up top. Alright, we're gonna go ahead and get this bolt off for this front engine mount. And I'm just using a breaker bar. Break it loose, and then we can do it by hand. Okay, so now we got this engine mount pretty much unhooked. And we're going to have to go ahead and move to the rear one. I'm just going to unbolt these 2, use a breaker bar to break them loose. And then I already broke them loose, so now I can just use this. This is 17 millimeter. The front mount was 14 millimeter. There we go. Those two are off. We'll leave those two next to each other so we can find them. And one bolt. Okay, we got these two bolts here. They should be 17s. I'm gonna go ahead and use my breaker bar, break them loose. I'm sure this is a lot easier because the car's not all rusted out. Now we can go back and address this bolt that's in the back. And we got the entire bar free. Half the hard part's done. Okay, so now this engine mount is bolted to the pan, so we're going to unbolt that. That looks like a 14 millimeter. Hey, guess what? I lost my 14 millimeter. I found my 14 millimeter. I was using it to hold the camera up. So you'll see on top of the pan, there's like this metal bracket bolted to the bottom of it in the middle. All we gotta do is just take that off. Why did I put it on so tight last time? So the engine mount's also bolted to the transmission. So now that we got everything out of the way, there's a bolt right here. Underneath the car, you'll be able to see it even though you can't see it now. But there's a bolt there, goes straight into the transmission. We got to take that off. Once that off, this bracket that's bolted onto the, or not, which is now unbolted off the upper oil pan, we'll be able to swing out of the way. Break it loose. There we go. That's the bolt. It used a 14 millimeter. This other bolt is right above the axle, and it looks to be a 17. The one that's above the axle, you don't need to take off. You just got to loosen. You can see this is the upper oil pan. That's where the bracket bolted to. So now that the bolt up here is loose, which you can't see, and I did loosen a little tension on the engine mount. You can see, just move that out of the way. Once that's out of the way, you can get the oil pan on and off. The next step for me is I have to remove the turbo oil drain. If your car's not already turboed, you don't have to worry about this. But I do have to worry about it, so I gotta do it. Broke it loose. Now just spinning it off the oil drain. There we go, that is good, that is done. We'll get that out of the way. We're actually almost there. Next we gotta remove this lower pan. These are all 10 millimeter bolts. I got one non-factory bolt there. But these will all be that little taller 10 millimeter bolts. Which I got some brand new ones ordered. Here's a part number in case you want to order brand new ones yourself. I also got a brand new oil pan on the way, and I got a part number for that as well. I'm going to just take off all the bolts around the lower oil pan. Okay, so before you do this project, be extra, if you're not going to replace the lower pan and put a new one on there, be extra careful how you take this thing off, because yeah, if you dent it in any way trying to pry it open, you're gonna have issues, and we don't want that. We don't like issues. So they do actually make a special tool that you put in there and to help pry the oil pan off, which I do recommend if you are going to be trying to save the oil pan. But I don't want to go through my toolboxes trying to figure out where I put that tool. And I'm not reusing this pan, so I don't care. So I'm just going to use a screwdriver and a putty knife. All right, so at this point, this is where we're at. I do have a balance shaft removal, so I don't have a balance shaft in here. If you don't have a BSR set up, you will see a balance shaft in there. You do not need to remove the balance shaft to get the upper oil pan off. So at this point, you pretty much just got to attack every single bolt that you see underneath here, and then try and prying this thing off. The first time I did it, I struggled because of this little pins in there, and they got kind of corroded on, and so yeah, I was hitting this thing with a plastic hammer, and yeah, it probably took me, I don't know, 2 hours, not straight, but 2 hours of work trying to get this stupid thing separated from the block. Let's start taking all these bolts off. Most of them are going to be 12s, but there is going to be a couple 14s in there. So it looked like all the ones going to the transmission was 14s, I think. Yep, 14. So now we're going to get the 12s and start getting the rest of them. Now we're going to work on the bolts in here. BSR needs to come off because the pan won't lower without on there. So we're going to take that off. These use like a special torque spit. I'm going to put the balance shaft stuff inside my old pan. Now what I'm doing is I'm unbolting the oil pickup tube from up top. Now, this balance shaft, when I got it used. The corner here is bent, and that was so you could access this bolt. Swiggle this thing down. There we go. As you can see, that's the O-ring. We're going to replace that when we reassemble everything, but yeah, highly recommend just replacing that because you don't want an oil leak inside your engine because you'll never know about it and you won't have oil pressure. Got the torque spit. It is a E14. So if you got a balance shaft, you don't need to worry about doing this step. You'll have access to all the screws and the pan will, and the pan will lift off. Now that's out of the way, we can see the rest of these bolts. We can get to them. With the balance shaft there, you can get to these bolts, no problem. You know what? I'm going to see if we can pry the pan off with the dipstick tube still on there. I don't feel like trying to reach it because I got a lot of crap in the way to get to the bolt to disconnect it. This is the part that's a pain, is trying to get this pan off. So there is a spot over here which is pretty decent to pry at. In case you're ever wondering, Nissan RTV is good stuff, and this is probably the worst part of trying to get a pan off, is trying to break it loose. All right, so I grabbed a pry bar, and so we're going to attempt it with the pry bar. Someone in the comments may tell me that I shouldn't be trying to pry the upper pan off with the AC compressor. But if it works, it works. We're just going to slide this underneath. Oh, it's loose. Uh-oh. I almost had an oil pan fall on my head. There we go. As you can see, the oil pan is now completely off. You can see the crank in there. If you're to do rod bearings, this is where you'd attack it from. All right, that's the pan we just took out. We're going to have to save this because the new pan doesn't come with one of these. See the 2 oil feeds I was telling you about? I'll show you where those washers go. They're not washers, they're O-rings. They go in right here. Safe side, replace these every single time you take off the pan. These are probably still would be okay if I used them because I didn't run the car very long at all with these in there. But I'm replacing them to be on the safe side. Your O-ring, which we are going to have to unmount this when we reassemble everything. That's your dipstick O-ring right there. That's your dipstick O-ring right there. These two, basically oil passages. So that's why those O-rings are kind of important. If these are leaking, then you have potential of not having as much oil pressure as you could, because the oil could be leaking back into the oil pan instead of going into your engine, which is not good at all. So as you can see, it is a bit of work to do this kind of project, but it is doable. And yeah, I kind of hope this is kind of guide someone, anybody who needs to do this kind of project, to give them some sort of guide on what to do, because especially when you first start it, it's like, this is a lot of work. And it is a lot of work, but it's not that bad once you get going at it and you have an idea of what you need to do. So that's why I'm really hoping this video does help someone that is doing this. If you got any questions, let me know. Thank you for watching. Aloha. Peace out. Catch you on the next one. Oh, before I leave, let's talk about the dipstick. The bolt for the dipstick is underneath there. It's pretty much like in between the AC compressor and the alternator.